well, why don't we just come up with a way in which we could tell comic stories effectively and fascinatingly using this new technology, this new media. And to that end, I with an enormous amount of help from my fellow creators and fellow workers on this project, have come up with something which combines the very best writing talent and artistic talent in the industry, all coming together to tell comic stories in a new and hopefully improved way. So, to all of you people out there, welcome to Electricomics.
Hi everybody. Big finish. How do I make it stop? There we go. Hello. Welcome to the Comic Electric, the first English language digital comics symposium. It may be the first digital comics symposium ever, but we're just hedging our bets against Korea and France having beaten us to it. Hi. In a minute, we're going to do our keynote, which is going to be really talking about the project we've all been working on, Electricomics. But before we do that, I've just got a few kind of general, boring bits at the beginning that you always have to say at the start of a research event about stuff. Hopefully, everyone who needs them have found the toilets, but there's a toilet at the end of the corridor and more toilets on the floor above and below in the same place. Fire escapes. I really hope there's not a fire. End of this corridor, there's a fire escape. Should you need to escape for any reason. I also want to say just a few thanks to people kind of in the school that have helped us put on the event. So I have to say thank you to TBAD and GVEL, which are two of the research groups here, and the media research group, because they've all kind of chipped in to help put the event on. Particular thanks to Stephen Adams, who's our head of research, who stumped up the money to pay for the food and drink that we'll be having during the day. Also have to thank my cryptic notes me. I have to thank James and Tom. Tom is our technician here who's going to keep us running all the way through, an MA student at the university. And James at the back, who's behind the cameras, who's also delivering a paper today, so I'm fascinated to see how he's going to do both. And animation, the animation program here, who's given us the use of their base room for the day. So this is usually a teaching space, which is why you see exciting posters and bits of work on the walls. I don't know what that note means, but I'm supposed to thank them. Oh, it's Media Research Group. I've done that. Excellent. As people hopefully heard from the internet, so we're going to be live streaming throughout the day. So this is on YouTube at the moment. And we're also going to be doing a better quality recording to eventually archive the talks. If anyone doesn't want to be filmed or doesn't want to be placed online, that's absolutely fine. That's cool. Just let James know and he'll make sure that he switches off the stream during that point and also doesn't record you during the other bits. I warned that there may be a photographer from the school around at some point just taking some photos for publicity as well. Again, if anyone doesn't want to end up in our publicity photos, just let me know and I'll make sure I search through them and you don't appear anywhere in the record in case you're on remand or should be somewhere else or something. I don't know. Witness protection. Yeah. And lastly, just the schedule for the day. Again, we've got them at the front, so hopefully everyone's seen them. We're already running 10 minutes behind, so we've started well. But we've kind of scheduled in breaks throughout after every panel to help allow for us to run behind. But we start with our keynote, then we've got audience and transmedia. For lunch, we couldn't afford the budget for lunch. We spent it all on tea and coffee and wine for the evening. So you guys will have to find your own lunch. But there are two cafes, student cafes, very nearby. One just outside the building there and one just outside the building over there. So one in the big black fronted building and one in the glass fronted gallery. Both of those do tea, coffee, sandwiches. That one also does sushi and bagels and things. So you're welcome to just purchase lunch from either of those. And then after, we've got panels on digital techniques, authors, readers, and players, and motion. Never have there been 4 papers together about motion comics. This is really exciting. I'm looking forward to that. And in the evening, we've managed to secure a little budget for an evening reception. So we'll have some wine and nibbles and things going on from 6:10. I think that's pretty much everything I had to say. Is there anything like really important that people need to know that I haven't told them just now? This probably isn't a problem. If any of you have parked on campus but needed a permit and haven't got one, I've also got some spare permits. But I think most people contacted me beforehand about that. Okay, cool. Well, let's do a keynote now. Oh, that's the same thing I just closed. Why are there two of these? I'm going to hand over to Leah.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming along. I have to say extra enormous thanks. I'm very grateful for everybody being here. I'm particularly grateful for all people coming from very, very far away. We basically, the Electricomics project has finally rumbled to a launch, last month, barely a month ago, and has been 18 months, 2 years in the making. The initial idea, the reason we put the Crash Bang Wallop Alan Moore film up is because it is, in essence, a Crash Bang Wallop Alan Moore production, even though he's mainly sat in that very same armchair doing exactly that for the duration of the project. He hasn't done a whole lot in the way of coding. His coding skills are not really up to much. But his idea was to create amazing, wonderful digital comics, just to be a background detail in one of his transmedia film projects. So, as usual, he has this idea and he sends Mitch and Pete, his co-directors at Orphans of the Storm. They went off to try and see if they could make it a reality. Pete knows Ed. Ed says there is a fund. We could apply for money from a fund, which is the Digital R&D Fund for the Arts, which it seemed like a fairly weighty fund to apply to. It seemed like a fairly serious thing, and we did have to go down to Nesta and present ourselves to a panel of 8 people who sat there staring at us in a not completely terrifying way. We actually stumbled through our pitch, and astonishingly they took us up on it. They said, yes, go away and build it, which was actually more terrifying than the pitching session, I have to say. So basically, we've Orphans of the Storm, a caster, which is the technical partner, and Alison Gazzard, who unfortunately couldn't be here, we will miss her, and Alison and Daniel are our research partners. So we sat down. How do I?
Chris, which one? Forms.
Okay, yes. Electricomics. That was one of Dad's contributions. Is a long, complicated to say name that takes up all of a tweet, and and does sound very much like a 1950s vacuum cleaner or something. But we pride ourselves on being cutting edge, technologically speaking, and at the same time weird and antique and slightly.
I think he also named this symposium, although he was joking, but we took him seriously.
Yes. Basically, yeah. I've had to actually rein him in and say stop with the portmanteau words that begin with the letter, please, because there's only so many you can take. So yes, there's our the partners. That's what I should have been doing. And this is our first meeting, which, as you can see, we maintain the cutting-edge technological kind of atmosphere. I actually, when we posted these online after the meeting, I had lovely snarky comments saying, "That doesn't look like a digital app studio." And I was like, no, it wasn't. And also, we didn't have Wi-Fi, and it was literally a table in an old library in a 400-year-old abbey in Northamptonshire, which I think is a totally appropriate space to have such a bonkers kind of project. But yes, so basically, we all got round the table, and Dan briefed us on digital comics. I'd done digital comics before, and I'd read digital comics before, but in terms of Pete Hogan and my dad and the rest of the cast gang, basically he got us all up to speed and gave us like a running potted history of digital comics and where we were up to, and that was our kind of, that was the brief he gave this big info dump, and they ran off to do it. So what we told Nesta faithfully, the actual brief that we said we would do, promised, contractually promised, was to set out to explore how digital technologies can change and enhance. Which one do I read? Oh no. Change and enhance a traditional print-based medium through the development of an adaptable and easily accessible toolset aimed at creative practitioners in the wider arts sector. So the reason they gave us the money was basically because they could see that something that would deliver rich content and would be easily packageable and have would have masses of use for the wider arts sector. People could make digital comics about their collections. To do this, we set out to understand the current state of digital comics, so all of that, no mean feat anyway, relationships between comic writers, artists and technology partners in the creation of digital comics, so what practices are out there and why do people do things and how does digital impact comic creation, identifying a common language that could be used among a team, which sounds like the simplest thing and turned out to be quite hard, how digital technologies might affect reading, navigation, interaction and storytelling in digital comics. Now, the reading, navigation, interaction part, that was very much how does the app behave, how does the reader behave, is it navigable, can people, is it as instant and immediate and immersive experience as a paper comic? And then the storytelling in digital comics, that was what Pete, my dad, and I went off with from that first meeting. And basically, how do you push storytelling into digital? How do you do digital storytelling as opposed to just putting a comic onto a screen? I say we went away. I had to then brief Garth Ennis by email and say, Garth, we're going to push into digital storytelling. We're going to do these amazing things. It's going to be digital native. It's going to be pure digital content that's going to be, and he said, yeah, I think I've got something all fit already. I'll get that to you in a week. Is that all right? And I was like, yes, that's fine. And then when I got it, I was like, there's no digital kind of stuff in this. And he was like, yeah, you can work that without. And I was like, amazing, okay, that's great. And his comic is absolutely spot on. It's wonderful. But yes, different approaches. We had to basically figure out the key features that needed to be provided by a creator tool. So what was actually needed by a comic creator to make a digital comic? So what would the minimum be? And it started off as quite a shopping list and gradually got eroded. But I think what we've got now is spot on for a bottom line. And then the current digital comics market. So that was more about digital comics business models. So do you do subscription? Do you do pay on demand? Do you do pay what you want models? And we had to deliver a kind of overview of what was out there. And then as well as all that was our research proposition. And as well as all that, we had to create a free reader app for reading comics on, 4 free comics for people to read that would push into digital and be sublime and wonderful, a free comic creation tool, which is now the generator, and a free open source code library, so that all of the code that that Julia has spent all these many months putting together, that would be available for people to use. We had to write up a report, which is currently being, marked is the wrong word, but I definitely feel it is being marked. Guidelines to not just say how to use our app, which I haven't actually done, but also how to make a comic, stuff to do with storytelling, for arts organisations who may not have encountered a comic. So I'm imagining kind of people in offices going, we need to put all of our Greek pots into a comic. How do I do it? What is a comic? And then a community. So basically, we to begin with, when we saw how much this lovely government research and development grant was for, we were like, excellent, we're going to make this Electricomics world, as my dad said, Electrocosmos. We're going to have this enormous... There are badges. We got badges printed before we even got sick of it. So yes, Electrocosmos, basically we imagined an entire discrete social network where people could upvote each other's comics and like and comment. And budget-wise, it just wasn't possible. But what we've decided to do instead is use the social network that is already there. So we're using Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, anywhere where people already do their work. Let them share their comics on there because it's what they're already doing. So that is an introduction to the vast, sprawly, nebulous, and contrary project, I think. And I'll hand over to you for the tag in. Yes, I don't know if you probably.
Yeah, I'll leap forward. So I'm going to try and contextualize some of what we're doing by just doing like a little history, a brief history of digital comics, and kind of where I think Electricomics fits into that, and also how Electricomics is reacting to that. And this is like the earliest example I can find of someone thinking seriously about digital comics. I think it's interesting because it puts it much further back than most people think, which is 1970, which is Ted Nelson, who's kind of like one of the fathers of hypermedia and behind lots of the ideas of hypermedia that pervade the internet and the web and things like that. And he invented this idea of hypercomics. And he saw them as an educational tool. So he saw them as these fun things that kids could use. They could be reading a comic strip and they could touch the screen with a magic pen that would let you jump to the specific part of the comic that would give you the information you need. This is, you've got to remember, way before any of this technology kind of was really out there. So it was really quite forward-thinking what it was. And it invented this whole particular kind of digital comic, the hypercomic, which is about branching narrative and choice. So that's the earliest I could find. The first actual digital comic I could find, I have Paul Grivet to thank for this because someone told me about it in a talk I was doing with him at Gosh Comics in London. And that's Red Hawk from 1986, which is a game by Silhouette Software. This was for the ZX Spectrum, Commodore 64, and Amstrad CPC, and it's essentially a text-adventure game that you interact with using like classic text-adventure type what you want to do next, but the whole story is told through this kind of constantly adapting comic strip at the top. So in terms of complexity of narrative and interaction, it's actually one of the most complex digital comics ever made. It's incredibly complex. It's like a little simulated Grand Theft Auto type world in there, where you walk around as this reporter who can say his secret magic word, which is hawk backwards, qua, and he transforms into Red Hawk. And you go around investigating things and fighting crime as Red Hawk. If you load the game and don't do anything, after a few hours you die because the nuclear power plant melts down because you didn't investigate it and solve the crime. So they've actually got a simulated world within this comic strip going on back in 1986. Graphically it's very simple, graphically it's very primitive, but in terms of the complexity of interaction and world building there, it's quite impressive. Also interesting, I think, from a kind of transmedia point of view, is the film Big with Tom Hanks. 2 years later, 1988. At one point in the film, the character he's playing is the guy. You guys know the plot of Big. He's a small guy who wants to be a big guy, and a child who wants to be a man. And he goes to work for a toy company, and he proposes making for the toy company an electric comic book that's different every time it's read. So he's really talking about the same thing, a hypercomic. And I think he's actually talking about inventing the iPad when you read the description of what he's talking about. So it's fascinating that's just there, lobbed into a bit of pop culture from the 80s. When digital comics start to get a bit more mainstream is really in the 1990s. That's when computers have got fast enough, graphic cards are nice enough, screen resolutions are increasing, storage space is increasing. You can actually start to capture how good comics look on paper on the screen. You can't really do it because the paper is much higher resolution, but you can do it in a more serious way. So you see CD-ROM comics start to appear. So those are often either big dumps of lots of comics together, or comics with limited bits of animation and sound added, or sometimes hypercomics with multiple choice, sometimes comics where you can see the pencils and the other stages. And they're kind of cool, but they don't really catch on. They don't become this kind of mass thing. And I think part of the reason for that is in 1993, you have this massive growth in the World Wide Web, and that kind of supersedes what the CD-ROM was going to be for comics. So what really did it for the web, the point the web really took off, is when they added the ability to display images alongside text, which again happened in 93. And you see web use then grows by a factor of 341,634%. So that's significant growth for a medium. And that's also where webcomics appear. And webcomics, unlike CD-ROM comics, really do seriously catch on. They become a kind of major part of the comics industry, really. I think the term webcomic can apply to any comic distributed and read via the World Wide Web. And so when I say via the World Wide Web, I mean in a web browser, because you could distribute a PDF via the web, but I don't really think it's a webcomic, I think it's got to be distributed and read within the World Wide Web, and then it counts. And there's lots of different kinds of webcomic, lots of different kinds of ways they operate, but if we were to say what some common features of them, they're typically creator-owned rather than owned by a publisher. They tend to be serial narratives, so they tend to be these ongoing stories, and they update really regularly, so that might be once a week, but the more popular ones maybe even 5 times a week. They're usually free to read, which means creators receive their revenue via other ways, so combinations of advertising, merchandising, reader donations, pledge drives, crowdsourcing, all these kind of things that build off having a large readership. And they do have a large readership, because these are the first kind of digital comic to reach a mass audience. Once webcomics were really kind of arriving on the scene, this coincided with, probably not coincidentally, a real downward turn in the US comics industry. Comics readership was really shrinking at exactly the time webcomics readership was growing. And so, and I think it's true today, popular webcomics have readership numbers that at least equal and often dwarf the readership of popular monthly printed titles. So there are a lot of people that experience of digital comics, I think, is still, for the moment, webcomics. There are 2 really kind of popular formats for a webcomic. One is a kind of classic newspaper-style strip. It works really well because it fits the dimensions of the screen, and if you're going to be putting out, these daily or 2 or 3 times a week, it's something very achievable for a creator to do and get it out there in front of the audience. You also see people working to a full page, sometimes portrait, like a comics page, a traditional comic, sometimes landscape. People working like this are tending to also have their eye on putting out a print version of the book, and they may just be particularly in love with the original page dimensions. When I was a young Turk of webcomics back when I started, I hated people that put page dimensions, because it seemed mad not to do it in the dimensions of the screen. These days, I'm much more laid back about that kind of thing, and also things like digital comics and tablets that kind of change that, because we can all turn our screens around anyway. So webcomics really brought a lot of new possibilities, and that's when people really start to actually think about what you could do with digital comics that you couldn't do in print. You benefit as a creator of webcomics from relatively cheap production and distribution costs. You've got a little hump to buy the computer and to get stuff online, but it's much cheaper than trying to print the comic yourself and distribute the comic yourself. And conversely, this means the role of publishers and distributors as gatekeepers to content is eroded. And I think the idea of a gatekeeper is really interesting. The idea that for print comics, they're controlled by and gate-kept by the publishers, by the distributors, and they control what gets into the shops and what gets in front of the reader. Whereas with the web, all of that's kind of eroded or shifted around. So there are no people really preventing anyone from putting out their own comic and getting it in front of the reader. There are other problems about how you discover those comics and things like that, but they're kind of a separate set of issues. And while those strip and page-based formats are definitely the most popular on the web, at least in the English language, what you did also see was because the web is a relatively low barrier to creating kind of experimental work, you do a little bit of HTML knowledge, you could do something quite weird and quite strange. We saw lots and lots of quite interesting experimental digital comics springing up as well over between, say, 95 and now. That's 20 years of experimentation with the digital comics form. So we saw lots of weird and wonderful stuff in that period. And I'm not going to talk about it now because I think a lot of these things are going to be coming up in various people's talks. But just to get an idea of all the different stuff that was kind of moving away from the page, you've got things like hypercomics where you've got multiple pathways through the narrative, maybe database-driven narratives where things are happening randomly, things hybridizing with video games like with Red Hawk, reader-creator collaboration, so people create the comic in response to what the reader's doing, and the reader's choosing the next bit, and then the creator doing that. You've got the idea of the infinite canvas, which is an idea championed by Scott McCloud, where the screen, rather than being the page, is this window on a much larger layout of panels. There's lots of comics out there that use the infinite canvas on the web. It's never caught on in, again, English language quite as much as still keeping the pages. But in Korea, the standard way of creating a digital comic is infinite canvas. And most Korean web comics you see will be done that way. So much so that they recently published online a whole bunch of retellings of the Star Wars saga from the point of view of Luke Skywalker from when he's a little kid. And I went to look at them, and they're all infinite canvas. These are full official editions covering the Star Wars, and they're all big, long scrolls. And it lets you do things like put stories in particular shapes, scroll around them, zoom into them, have interesting things happening with parallax and depth, and even building comics into 3 dimensions. And then you've got all the time-based possibilities of digital, things like animation within the panels, moving panels around, adding audible sound, delivering panels to the screen one by one, and so having fine control over that, all the way into motion comics, where we start to get towards something that's maybe animation but with influence from comics, which, as I said, we've got a full panel on later today, so we'll really be getting to grips with that. And then in 2010, something happens. 2010, Apple released the iPad, and this is like the next big impact on digital comics. Around then, and through to the present day, touchscreen-based tablet computers and smartphones are really rising in popularity. I'd be surprised if there are many people here today who don't have a smartphone in their pockets, or rather a comic reading device in their pockets. And as these things appear, new tablet-based formats of digital comic begin to appear, and also introduce confusion, because I think for a lot of people, when they say the word digital comics, they just mean the comics you read on a tablet or on an iPhone. But I think, which is confusing, because I think all these comics that are digital comics, but when people say digital comics, they kind of mean the things they read on their iPad. Because tablet screens match the dimensions and orientation of US Comics page, this is really what the publishers were waiting for, because they could now easily push digital versions of all their existing print comics out via services like Comixology and all these other ones that spring up to service these new machines. Let's keep going. That plus the addition of this thing that Comixology called guided view, which allows the same comic to be read on smaller screens and also allows things like double-page spreads to be consumed by these screens, has really made it easy for the print industry to adapt to digital in a way that they just didn't quite get with the web. Just the fact, I think, that you can orientate this thing so that your comics page fits perfectly on there is a big deal. And that became a kind of standard digital comic format, which you would read most comics in now. You also have what, again, Comixology called guided view native, and I'd probably describe as panel delivery, which is an approach that comes from webcomics, where you don't show all the panels at once, but you do have some control about how they build up, when they appear, when they disappear from the screen. So we're starting to see comics, mainstream comics, created in that format specifically for iPads and Android tablets and whatever. But both these approaches, although cool and let you do interesting things, they do weaken some of the essential nature of comics. So they weaken the spatial network nature, where you've got all the panels interconnecting with each other on the page. You can see them all and make your way through the network. And a word I have to thank James for at the back, flippy through this, which is his contribution to the comics theory canon, which is that physical page-turning nature of comics, where you always know kind of where you are in the story. You can flip back, you can flip forward, and you can kind of explore the temporal map of the comic at your own pace. And as soon as you start to do fancy digital stuff, you start to erode that a bit. So that's one of the downsides of it. So I kind of see tablets, just in terms of digital comics, as having certain pros and cons. So this isn't comparing tablets to print, which is a whole other discussion. This is comparing tablets to what came before, which is webcomics. So I think they have real pros, and they add a kind of immediacy. When you read a comic on a tablet, there's no interface, it's just you and the comic. They add portability, really, obviously. People, again, when I was starting out, you couldn't do a webcomics panel with someone complaining about not being able to read them in the bath or up a tree or something stupid like that. And now you can, so yeah. So you can read them wherever you like. They're kind of tactile. You touch and you swipe and you interact with the page in a certain way. And they've definitely got physicality, because they know the angle at which you're reading, things like that, and you can create a comic that perhaps responds to how you're moving or the tablet. And also they have a locativity, so they can know where they are in space. And again, you can create comics that react to being read in different locations and exciting and stuff like that. And I kind of messed it up the list because I couldn't think of a word that had itty at the end. But they've got a camera, so that's kind of interesting as well. There's lots of things you could maybe do around that camera to do new stuff. Camerativity, there you go. Cons, so I think negatives. I think, and we can kind of take this order however you need. Because to make comics for these, you need more advanced technical skills, really, than you do for the web. The web's easy, it's HTML, you can kind of do that, you can hack that together. With these things, there's no direct way of doing something cool easily if you just want to muck around and getting it out in front of people. And this has two effects, I think. I think it stifles the variety of stuff out there. If you look at the kinds of digital comic that are generally available for tablets, there are basically two kinds. There are the standard Comixology comic with a bit of a guided view, and there are guided view natives, and they're the only really mass form of comic that's out there. Whereas if you look at that list from the web, there were tons of all these different things. And it also means the return of gatekeepers. So it means now you have to go back through a publisher, or you have to go back through a service like Comixology, or you have to go back through the app stores like Apple and Android to get your stuff out there. So it's a shift away from the kind of freedom of the web. And these thoughts kind of coalesced. We were talking about, we and got to go to Mexico, yay, and present some of our stuff. And we were talking to a lot of Mexican creators. And these thoughts, this bit kind of coalesced then. What I kind of realized was what I liked about the Electricomics format, and what I think we've done with it, is we've kind of tried to embrace all these advantages of the potential of tablets and these new things, but try to return some of the variety, freedom, and inventiveness of the web to digital comics. Because I think there's tons of really inventive stuff that people have done on the web, but they've kind of got lost in the tabletization of comics. So what we're doing is we're trying to lower the technical barrier to creating these things, and that brings that all back in. And I think we're also doing, I think Ed will pick up on this a bit, trying to slightly reduce the gatekeeping role. So keep getting the role so it's more about, again, like a conversation between creator and consumer with less middlemen controlling what can be there and what can't be there. And I think at that point, I pass on to Leah again, and we try and do our demo. So,
Can we say try?
and the demo is going to work. So we're going to actually show you what we've been working on. So let me see.
That's not the app, that's a picture.
That's a picture of the app.
Don't be confused now. Hooray! Excellent.
Okay, cool. So,
Thank you. I had a horrible moment where I thought this was just going to be like my Sims game that I paused this morning. But no, hooray, it's the app. Okay, so this is our reader app, which you can download from the App Store, Apple App Store, so just search for Electricomics. Download it, it's free, and this is what you are presented with. The 4 comics, this is the introduction, where I wrote, not in a hurry, not under deadline of Leah, can you get us some content because we're launching in. So this is basically the introduction that I've already given you. There is our lovely credits where we all look strange and photogenic. We have the Acasta one, which I have to draw attention to because of the awesomeness of this is actually what they really look like, as you can see. And then we have our 4 comics. The 4 comics, we thought, because we could just investigate one set of new kind of navigation tools and storytelling tools, and we could get them really, really spot on, or we could do 4 and make life really, really excellently difficult for ourselves. I say ourselves, I mean Julia again. Sorry, Julia. So yeah, I'll do Big Nemo first. I'm assuming you've all downloaded this and have enjoyed it already, but let's take a look. So this says, this is a tap comic, so you simply tap to progress. Now, if I had a penny for everybody who's picked it up and started, I love passing it to people. Everybody just picks it up and goes, what do I do? But yeah, tap to start. Is that right, Bill?
That's right.
That's right, Bill. Cool. Okay, so tap to progress for Big Nemo. And if I get it on the right side, please work.
When we plug it into a projector, it sometimes makes it go a bit. There we go.
It does. It's because I'm not tapping
It's
on
working
it.
now.
Okay, so Big Nemo is basically unusually for Alan Moore. He experimented with the formal qualities of a comic page and how you could deliver a comic within those different formal constraints. So it starts off black and white. It starts off these lovely cinematic tiers. We've got our little almost animated waif walking through.
They are when you're on the iPad.
They are, yes. It's just
Sorry.
because it's on landscape for reasons I have no. Yeah, the font is legible on when it's portrait. It's not normally like this. So
It's the resolution on the projector.
that'll be it. Yes, of course. So yeah, you're going along. Wait. Now, this is where it gets complicated because the script that Colleen Duran received was, I mean, Alan Moore scripts are famously verbose and full script, I believe they're called. I don't know if that's what artists call them. They call them several more colourful phrases than that. But Colleen got this one, and she said that it had instructions for animation, for sound, for navigation, for every part of it, because obviously you want it to be thorough. And I got an email saying, Leah, I actually cried reading this, and I was just like, oh my god, I've actually ruined her life by sending her this little 8-page script. But props to Colleen. She actually managed to shake it off and sit down and go through it. And as you can see, she has done an absolutely staggering job. This page is my favourite page. I don't think it was her favourite page, but I can totally see why he wrote it in. I saw the roughs for this and the pencils, and I did fear for her sanity as well as his, although that's kind of a moot point. So then we've had a page building up. This one, the elements move across the page, and the page stays there. We actually we tried sound for Big Nemo. We had a lovely guy called Tony, who I have to say hi. Thank you, Tony. He made us some bespoke sounds for this, and ambient background noise. It was amazing. Me and John sat and went through all of these little samples. So in the script, we sent Tony this abridged version of the script that said, like, page 5, duck quacks. And we got back, like, 4 different duck quacks. And I had to go through and go, which duck? Is it... it can't possibly be that duck. I had to basically do a casting call for duck quacks. But in the end, the sound was too much for the app and kept making everybody's old iPads fall over. So we've had to put that on the 2.0. Okay, so this is another of my favourite bits. It's all my favourite bits. But this is the gradual progression. Do I leave the spoiler off? You told me off for spoiling it terribly. I won't spoil it. But yes, so basically this has got the wide view again, and then the animation. So Big Nemo, formal experimentation with what a page does. Now, I'll show you Garth's, because although I might laugh and say, haha, look, he doesn't do digital, actually his is a wonderful example of a continuous scroll infinite canvas, which Frank Victoria, who is currently next door, just there, teaching first years how to paint, so we can't nab him to congratulate him. We'll have to do that in the break, maybe. You'll burst in on him and disrupt his class, but it's a lovely infinite canvas scroll and totally suits the cinematic kind of subject matter and the letter subject matter. It's really natural to read. It doesn't have anything leaping out at you or jumping about or anything, but it really works, and it's a beautiful, beautiful story. The third one I will show you is Second Sight, which I show you nervously because Second Sight is the one that gives me the most pains. I think it gave Julia the most pains, and Sean, and everybody on the project. I think, Big Nemo, for all that it is complicated, it had a very simple tap to progress. Pete Hogan took the ball, ran with it off into the mountains somewhere over there, and was just like, yes, I want this and that, and he had a big shopping list for his. So we've got hotspots, so you can tap the little phone, and then, oh look, the radio is doing it now. Sean sorted this one out for us. We had no idea how we were going to do this, so we've got little hotspots that you tap, but you can go back and forth. You can go the different choice points, and then when you finish, let me see, done all of them? Yeah, then you get to this one. So it's more kind of, I'll leave that one there just in case. But so basically, it was a like a choose your own adventure book where you can choose your way through the story, and potentially, if it was a longer format, you could have a whole story that goes off in one direction or another direction. It makes it really gamified, and the only possible drawback I could see to it is that you can't keep your fingers in between the pages like you can with a choose your own adventure book in case you die. So I'm afraid if you die, you just die, unless we can build a finger keeping in device into the app, but I don't know if that's possible. So, and then last but not least, which I would say because I wrote it, is Sway, which I remember to do start again. Every single time I demoed this in Birmingham, then I forgot to press start again, which made life more complicated. So, we have the wonderful Nicola Scott watercolour artwork, which does never hurt. Now, I demonstrated this in Mexico, and at this point, everybody in the audience went, woo! So if you could possibly... Thank you, that really... So, it basically, it was all based on a strange and peculiar dream I had where I actually could travel through time by leaning backwards, which just shows you I shouldn't eat cheese on toast last thing at night. But also, thank you, brain, for producing complete story ideas overnight. So you can swipe through, and at the points where she trips, falls, she ends in a different century, which has happened to all of us.
Because you tilt the iPad.
You tilt the iPad, and it takes you to a different... Oh, and sometimes it goes upside down, which is good. So yeah, there's the 4 navigation methods, 4 storytelling devices, and 4 delivery methods. So I think...
Do you want to show one of the...
Yes, of course. Now, this is where some of you guys are here will actually come in, because we've actually got our generator, which spits out a Electricomics file, and when you host that file yourself, you can tweet it at me, and the world, of course, but mainly at me, because I want to read them all and keep them in my little library here. Now, what one... That one was really good. Oh, should I do yours? Yours is the best, and of course, how could I even... I'll do Daniel's, because Daniel's is awesome. So basically, this has been made in our generator, and Dan's is fantastic as usual. Dan does amazing things with amazing things in storytelling using absolutely bare minimum in terms of art, and it's absolutely perfect and exquisite, and you don't kind of need... I realised then, I was like, well, my enormous Nicola Scott artwork, amazing Colin Duran, we've got Paul Davidson, we've got, Frank Victoria, and Dan does loads with just some triangles, so he puts us all to shame. So yeah, but you can make just an example of what you can make in the generator. I'll show you another one. This is a strange one, which is by Mr. Scoobit, and I do not know his name because on the meta information it just says Scoobit. So I think, let's see. So yeah, this is a strange kind of Max Ernst collage story, which I particularly enjoyed. And we have, let me see. The Birds of Twilight Park, which is Lars Schwed-Nygaard, who I might actually love a little bit because he keeps tweeting links to amazing comics made in our generator. And they are, as you can see, very beautiful and really make use of the step-based comics, really have wonderful surprises, wonderful... subtle animation effect by the birds moving around and stuff. I'm very impressed, and I think he's porting it over from his own projects that he's already done. So we've had, I think a lot of people are going to find it useful to get stuff that they've already done up into our format. So I think I can't demonstrate the Creator tool right now, but that's the app as we have it. So now you've seen the wonders of it, shall I pass over to the technical team responsible for putting all of this together.
we haven't. This is a caster.
Sorry.
We built everything.
Yes, they built everything. That's Julia, that's Sean, and that's Ed. And
I think that's the first clap we've ever got.
Can we have another clap, please, guys?
That's been decided for 30 seconds. Do you want me to go with the background?
Yeah.
Usual details. Can I pop my slide up again?
Yeah. Do you want your first slide?
Yeah. Sorry, I can't run it if you like.
Charles.
Sean did the pictures, by the way, so you can't blame me for that one. So, I'm not a coder and I'm not a designer, I'm not a drawer, so there's other aspects of the project that's been my area of focus. But I was the person that Orphans of the Storm first came to talk to say, hey, we've got this thing about digital comics and making it wacky, and what could we do? Acasta Studios is actually much more of it's a development house, but its focus is very much on the mobile world. And we write apps and we do web services and back-end pieces, etc. But obviously we know a lot about the industry and what's good and what's bad from the mobile side of things. So we had the digital comic formats, which was great and interesting idea, but what we were also looking for, what would make commercially good sense in terms of how would you actually deliver it and build something that could grow and would be a benefit. And in the mobile world, the people who did this best, as you can probably guess from this slide, is actually Apple. We look at the history of what people were doing, such as BlackBerry and Danger and Nokia, and people who were trying to put together ecosystems and trying to build propositions that would take off. And Apple were the first people who got it really right. And the reason they got it right is that they actually paid attention to every piece that you needed to do to build an ecosystem. If you miss a piece off, then the whole thing stops. And they very much concentrate, as you've got on this slide, the Xcode app development environment. So they produced the idea of apps. They then produced the development tools and handed them out to third parties that said, you can go and write your own app. They then provided an app store that said, you, Mr. Publisher, you, Mr. I'm doing this from home, however you want to do it, I'm as a professional, large corporate, you can put your apps up here and we will distribute them to consumers. They then obviously tied in distribution, but importantly, they also tied in money. Now, they didn't do this on version 1. There was no idea of third-party apps when they first brought the iPhone out. This only came in version 2 and version 3 that other people might want to do it. And I think they were surprised by the success, even though they got all these pieces right. So we now have a situation in the Apple world where they've got millions and millions of apps and tens of millions of actual consumers, and they link all the pieces together. And so we look at this, and this is obviously something that we should think about emulating or taking advantage of, or as usual in this world, borrowing ideas from. And when you look at the ecosystem, and we'll use the Apple one as the model, there's lots of good things about it. And I think Dan's already touched on some of those. There's simplicity, ease of access. You can go, I want an app to do this. You can find it in 30 seconds. You can download it in 60 seconds. You can start using it immediately. It's tied into credit cards. It's very seamless. There's a great idea of standardization. Apple in particular said, you should write it this way, you should present it in this way. We've checked it for you, so we know it's not going to be full of security holes, etc. But also importantly, the apps that are put out there are owned by whoever publishes them. They don't say, give me the app, it's now mine. They very much said, it's your app, you put it up there, you do what you like. And because of that, it helped drive a lot of growth. So there's a lot of good sides that we thought, yes, we'd like to take advantage of this. And then after a while, you of course find out the bad side, which is the bigger they get, the more the bad side starts to pop out there. Some of these elements people may disagree with, but they are facts. Technology lock-in. Once they've told you how you have to do it, you can't do anything else. You have to do it the way they want to do it. They form natural monopolies. Once you've started to build all the components together and people are tied into it, there's very few other places you can go to. There's an element of staleness that can come into that. Certainly with some of the ecosystems we see where they go, I'm the number one, I don't need to do anything more. And I think Comixology might, in the comic world, be accused of that. The last ones is very much on the money side of things. once they've got that natural monopoly, once they've got the control, once they've got the lock-in, then to an element you belong to them. You know, Apple take 30% of the revenue, and that's non-negotiable. And over time, they haven't necessarily put the percentage up that they take, but they start to tie you closer and closer and closer. You used to be able to say in your app, buy in the app or go to the web, and they stopped every app that allowed to do that. They make more and more things happen within the marketplace so they can make sure they capture more and more of the value. And they don't necessarily have to give you anything back for it. You know, okay, thank you very much. You generated 100 billion of revenue for us. Thanks. They don't have to say what they're doing it for or what they would give back. So looking at the project, I didn't do the Alan Moore picture either. Thanks, Sean. As part of the project, we knew that the ecosystem was the way we were going to go. Obviously, funding and time, etc., allowed us to take so far. So this is as far as we got. We've got the generator. We have a comic format. You've seen different types of versions, and we have a reader that we designed for the iPad. The project has got this far effectively. Looking to the future, where we're looking to take that to is obviously generator still, the comics, and then the introduction of a marketplace. Along the same lines you could say as Apple, whereby you retain ownership, you're the publisher, you decide for what it will be sold, how it will be sold, if you wanted to give it away free, etc. But if you do want to enable payments, and consumers are happy to pay for it from readers that will cover multiple platforms, then they can pay you back, and the marketplace returns the money back to you, the writer, the artist, the publishing house, whoever it is who actually has the comics that want to be put out there. So that's where we would like to take it going forward into the future, but we obviously need to make sure that we do it in a nice way. We're trying to look, if we built it, how can we do the good and then avoid the bad side of things when it becomes this fabulous success. And these are some of the elements that we've already put in place in terms of the structuring of the product and the ownership, etc., in order to allow freedom and to show that if we set this up, that you can trust us, that we're not going to lock you in. There's things to do, but there are advantages in trying to support Electricomics and continue to work with it. So from a generator point of view, and every element that we can, the libraries of JavaScript, etc., that are being used, they're all being open source. So you can just take them and use them on another project, whatever you like. The comics are open standards. The readers, again, will be open standards. If you want to write your own reader app that can read an Electricomic, you can go and write that as well. The last element, which has been put in place now, but you probably won't notice it because it's tucked around in the back, is the readers and all the software and all the different components are actually now controlled by a company called Electricomics CIC. And I don't know, does anybody know what CIC means?
That would be awesome.
It's an interesting sub company from the UK, and it's called a community interest company, and it sits halfway between a commercial company and a charity. And what you have to do is the company can make a profit, but you have to nominate who the company's benefiting and make sure that any assets from that company that it generates benefits that community. So if you can go to Company's House and you can look up Electricomics CIC and you can read the documents which I painstakingly wrote, and it says this CIC will benefit the comic book industry. So if it makes $1 billion, we have to give $1 billion back to the community, to the comic book industry. You can't take the money out. It's controlled by law. So overall, the aim of trying to support it is, yes, if money flows to the marketplace and we have to take a percentage to cover costs, etc., anything that we take will be minimized, will be considered for the writers and the artists and the readers that are coming through, and will be returned to them however possible, whether it's lower fees, whether it's grants, whether it's moving the technology on to add new features, etc. But looking forward, we want to do this in a way that, of all those things we listed as being the bad, we can't do them. And the only people who will benefit will be you. And that's where we go. Now over to more of the techie stuff.
So hi, Sean. So I came into this project probably about 2/3 of the way through, and the concept of Electricomics in terms of an app and how that would work and an app reader was all there. We had the content in terms of the comics, but then we also had to sort of apply that to app. So there were things that we had to consider, such as the user interaction and how we would display the comics. And obviously behind that as well on the sort of design side was a kind of a brand lead and how that would look. Fortunately, we had a lot of that sort of done for us initially. I forget his name now, the guy who did the logo. Todd Klein, who did all the logos. So we basically wanted to create something that would showcase the comics in terms of the covers and the content, and just sort of pare back everything else. So the backgrounds of the app, it's just a digitized version of the covers, really simple, black and white, so it kind of just showcases the artwork, because the artwork's obviously amazing. So we wanted that to be the sort of lead, and then the sort of things that once we sort of started testing the app, some of the things that sort of came about through user feedback were certain things like how to navigate the actual comics, because they're 4 very different styles of navigation. So we had the idea of creating an about page, which kind of told you what the comic was about in terms of content, the writers, but then also how to navigate them by use of icons. And that was pretty much it, really. It all kind of came together. I'm quite happy with it. Julia did more of the technical side of things.
I'm Julia. I developed the first 4 comics that Leah showed, and I also developed part of the libraries that runs the comics, and also I created the old generator tool, so I'm sorry for that if it's not perfect. All the comics run on web, because the main reason is the web is free and the web is everywhere. All your devices have a browser. Devices in the future will have browser, probably even cars and fridges. So if you want to read a comic while having breakfast, you can have it from the fridge, probably. And again, everyone can write comics in HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. Those are all free technologies. You don't have to pay anyone to use them, and you don't have to buy any tool to use them or write them. They can be both really easy or really complicated, depending on your knowledge, how deep you want to go, or how complicated you want your comic. The generator tool at the moment is creating really simple comics, because thinking what would you like to do is like creating the universe from scratch, literally. Because even just these first 4 comics have totally different ways of interacting with the user, navigating, different minds of the creator. So even when I had the scripts at the time, the comic is a little bit different from the script, because a lot changed in the process, because some stuff were doable but not usable, because the code can do a lot of things, but your main goal at the end is be usable to the users. And you can do something really complicated with maybe a lot of animations, but if the user is distracted or confused or cannot follow the comic, then you have to ask yourself, is this what I want? Do I have to follow the code, or do I have to follow the people? And so I would say that was the biggest challenge, really. And apart from the creator tool again, because it's like creating the universe from scratch, you have to think what people want. You have to also sometimes put boundaries on people and think for them, because the web existed for now 25 years, so a lot of the mistake have already been done and a lot of the lessons have already been learned. But I can see that in the comic universe, some of these are new things. So there's maybe a little bit of need of guidance to show and teach people what developers in the web have already seen as problems, maybe. But in the same time, comic can bring new ideas, because websites are one thing, but comics are totally different thing. So all the comics now are available only on iPad, but in theory they could be readable on normal browsers. So if we will ever have a funding, I hope so, it could be even really easy to develop to have it on a desktop, so any platform could read that. The generator tool, for example, is an example of how is again written in web technologies. It creates a server for you and is available on the main platform. So it means it's possible to create a reader, even if you have just JavaScript knowledge nowadays, to create a reader for the comics. So that's, anyone, everything is open source on GitHub. So if you want to dig in, do it, and good luck. And I'll say that's it.
Okay. Anything we've talked about, you can find at electricomics.net basically. So there'll be links to GitHub where you can get the code, you can follow a link to get the app, you can download the generator tool. And because we're a funded project, everything we've done is going to be open to the public. So as soon as the report is finished being marked, that will be up there. I think eventually we should get all the scripts up there, the in-process artwork. So pretty much the entire project is for the public to take part and see. And I guess we should take questions.
The library of third-party comics is also now on Electricomics.net. So if you think about having a go and generating one, then let us know about it. We can pop a link up on the website for you.
Do we have a mic for the audience? My God, look how organised we are.
Not only
Tom,
events for people.
could you be the mic person? This isn't so we can hear you, it's so the world can hear you. So no pressure when you ask questions.
Okay, there are only 30 people watching.
No pressure then.
You might as well be watching.
Hello. I'm Frederick from Norway. I'm going to speak later. I had a question for you, actually. You said it when you talked that you wanted to improve the display of the comics and so on. How do you, if I make a electric comic and now you have to enter the link, it's a little bit enveloped, and I had some errors finding a comic and stuff, so it's a little bit difficult step. But is the thought that when you can just publish it so it get displayed inside the app in the future?
Yeah, so eventually it should be in a place that it works much more like a normal marketplace. So you'll open up one of the reader apps, you can search through, browse, see what's there, and then pick it up directly from the marketplace.
Yeah.
What we bumped
It's
up.
a step into the future. It's not there at the moment, but that is very much the aim. Anything you can do to simplify the process and to speed it up and to have searchability is something that we'd like to encourage.
Within the budget we had to find a way that people could get their comics into the app that didn't require us to be vetting every comic and being in charge of the content, because it would load a huge amount of responsibility on us that we don't have the budget to meet. So this was a very neat solution that we found quite near the end of the project that really worked, so people could immediately see how it works.
It was very surprising. I thought it was a very cool thing to just wonder.
That is very much the Electrocosmos.
Question
I'll
over
be
there.
all the way across the room.
Hi, hello. My name's Fahed. I'm a writer. It's kind of a technical question. How do the scripts for these comics look? Are they more like movie scripts, or are they more like traditional sort of like comic book scripts in terms of like working in the animations and stuff like that?
Try and show you one in an exciting live thing. Because there's no set way that a comic script looks in the first place, there's no set way that an electrocomic script looks. They tend to be still, I'd say, more like comic scripts than movie scripts, but they include a bunch of other directions. Here, I've popped you on.
Can you not put me on just until I
Oh,
found
okay,
it?
right, just so we avoid crazy stuff.
Look, there's nothing in there that
Yeah.
isn't viewable, but no, if I'm broadcasting to the universe, then I'll be like, how
So-
did that get in there?
You can completely ignore it, because you can leave that conversation to somewhere else. Like Garth's script is just a standard comic strip, and it's Garth is famous for writing short scripts, and it is just as exactly what needs, nothing more. Alan's script really described everything. I had the luxury of reading Alan's script while I was sitting by a pool on holiday in Mallorca, and just a great relief that I wouldn't have to draw anything I was seeing described. But it does kind of explain everything. One of the big challenges for the project was which Leah touched on, was aligning the language so that comics people were using the same terms that the tech people were using, that the audience might use, so we'd understand when when a certain thing was described, what each person meant. We found again and again, we all brought our own kind of interpretation to what a particular phrase might mean, a particular technical term, and often they were quite different. So one of the things that Leah's guide will do is kind of hopefully bring everyone to the same footing so they understand how to describe different things. Yeah, the glossary will definitely be part of it. Yeah. We'll take more questions and come back to the script once it shows up.
Sorry, so I get my exercise for the day.
I should stand up so people ask questions.
Hi, my name's Matt. I've just got a quick question about the CIC. When you say it will benefit the comic book industry, specifically, how do you define those beneficiaries?
It's an interesting question. If you actually look at the history of CRCs, they're for things like the convenience corner shop in a village, and we'll reduce price for everybody in the village who comes to the shop. We've left it at the moment of saying it will benefit the comic book industry. If it starts to actually get off the ground to the next stage and then starts to generate money, the idea is to have the people who control the company. Obviously there's normal directors, etc., but the idea of that is to then appoint a nice panel of comic industry luminaries, etc., that can guide what should be done. I mean, the default position, which is, again, you come out of the tech industry, is the more money it makes, the less percentage the marketplace needs to take off the creators. You know, Apple takes 30%. It would be great if we could get to 2% or whatever else. And so you can return it directly to the creators that way. But there has to be a decision point somewhere, and a panel of experts, let's say, who make a decision to go, I'd love to have another generation of readers, or could you introduce these 27 features? And we can say, okay, technically that's going to cost about this much for coding work. Are you okay as a panel of advisors that that's what we spend the money on?
Right. So could the panel do sort of more, even broader community stuff and outreach things if it chose to? Or is it about benefiting creators specifically for Electricomics and coding specifically for Electricomics?
If we had that much money that we could do this, it would be a wonderful point to get to. I mean, you could turn around and say, we'll benefit the industry by just doing lots of advertising. You know, that's another way that it could be done. It could be, we're going to set up a grant fund that struggling comic book writers could apply to us and we can pay them to generate their comic. You know, there's lots of different ways that you could benefit, and it doesn't tie it down that tightly. All we know is that you can't asset strip it secretly. You have to hold it until you've decided what to do with any money.
Dave had a question?
Yeah. I suppose it's probably a question for Julie. Is that online GitHub repos yet, or will it be?
More a question, right? Because it's about copyright or more here.
So Julie's been documenting the generator tools. One of the things that we're aiming to do actually in the short term is to do a series of blog posts which explain some of the techniques, and we've just got the okay from Wolfmans of the Storm to actually use code snippets to explain what it was done and to provide the code that it was used to do that with. So yes, it should be appearing soon.
Cool. I'm happy. There are questions over here. I don't know who was first. We'll work this time.
Hi. Just a question about version 2. What would that be? When would it be coming? What would it contain in terms of the generator and the reader? Excellent. I had a feeling. Because I know Leo alluded to the use of sound as a nearly thing that was there for the current incarnation, and that's something to work on next. Is it just a case of we'll see how well it works, and if it's not in, it's not in?
Funding, that's kind of the next stage. We'll really figure out how we keep paying for development.
That is the. We've basically over the course of the project has been in a sort of assembling of a big shopping list of things we would like to do, things we would like digital comics to do, things creators would like the generator to do, things the writers would like the comics to have done, and we've had to kind of over the course of the project whittle it down to sort of minimum viable product. What could we actually afford to do? And we've got a shopping list as long as your arm. The one that springs to the top of that shopping list just by the quantity of people that have asked for it is putting it on Android. If I had a penny for everybody who says when is it going to be available on Android, then I would be small rich woman in Tahiti by now. But the next thing after that would probably be looking at expanding the generator tool, because I mean, as much as all of the writers involved would probably love to do issue. You know, this is possibly the longest it has taken the comics industry as a whole to produce 32 pages of comic. I think it's very expensive, 32 pages, but I think we'd only do that. At the moment, we're not looking at a publishing house kind of thing where we pay a lot of our mates to make amazing comics. What we would really like to do is push into the generator and make that as useful as possible. Get the assets in there so that people can make better comics for themselves. But like I say, it is a shopping list. Yes, sound is up there, you know, animation is up there. But what it comes down to is, unless I actually steal Sean and Julia and keep them in a cupboard and force them to work, then we're going to have to pay them. So, yeah, secondary funding is the kind of, and there's a lot of different avenues we're looking at with that. People have said, would you kickstart it? Kickstart Electricomics 2.0. I think we've only been out a month. I think it might be a bit early to ask people to put their hand in the pocket. I think that might be something to consider further down the line. There's, you know, Orphans of the Storm are looking into private revenue of some sort for an next thing, but it's at the moment we're just so proud and happy to have it at this stage. But yeah, we are accepting suggestions. So if there's something, if you ever look at the generator or the app and you say, I can see you doing this much more easily, you could streamline this, you could make that work better, tell us. And I mean that technically or just as a reader, just send, there's a contact form or social media, and my ongoing job is to listen to you all and say, this is what everybody wants, so tell me. And I believe we can put the script up for...
And I think we had better take the last two questions, because we're already running 20 minutes later than we said. So I think we had two questions there.
Hi, I was wondering which type of relations the Electricomics have with these websites that try to do a sort of Netflix service for comic books. Have you come across this, and are you planning to have relations with that?
We've definitely looked at that Netflix type model. One of the interesting things about during the, how long have we been doing this now? About 2 years? Yeah. The big changes in the digital comic landscape during that period have been really fascinating, because as soon as we announced, we started to see other similar things pop up on other people, you know, who've clearly been working on the same kind of thing for time. So it's a real mercurial time for digital comics, and we're definitely interested in Netflix models. We're interested in comicsology models. We're interested in advertising-led models. Yeah. My personal feeling is just whatever we do, we need to keep the format as open as possible to allow different ways of going after revenue, because I think there's not one fixed way that works yet.
We did this survey, didn't we? We did like a market research survey to see what people's buying habits were and how often they bought a digital graphic novel, or how often they bought, you know, if they paid a subscription and how much they'd be prepared to pay for a subscription. And it was really, really evenly split. There was a real, we were thinking like, this is it, we're going to find out the key to the digital comics market. And actually people, the comments were interesting. We waded through pages and pages of comments, and people saying, I like a subscription because I can just dive in and just read a big whole chunk of comics, and I don't have to particularly think about it. I just go, yeah, I can just have that. Some people are like, well, I'm on a budget. I only want to read something if it's something I choose. There was people, we did an interesting thing with the pay what you like models. We asked, do people ever use pay what you like models? And if you do you always pay the very minimum? Or do you pay like a bit more to support the company? Or do you always pay like the top amount that you can personally afford? And it was something minuscule, like only like 7% of people said that they paid the bare minimum. Everybody else that uses it always just chips in a bit to support, which I thought that's quite interesting in terms of emerging models and kind of what is it kind of the less you control, the less you ask for, the more people are happy to say, yeah, do you know what, have a tenner for it because I have a tenner and I like you kind of thing. So No, it's there wasn't any specific one that came out tops. It was very evenly split, and yeah, that just means we've got to make sure that we're um, agile enough to and open and kind of
The ideal aim, if we did the marketplaces, to enable all these models. So there would be an Electricomics subscription, and you can ask for money for your comic, or you can ask for donations for comic, or you can make it free. Quite a similar lane to where some of the app stores are. And then you, as a creative publisher, can say how you want it loaded up. You know, put it in the subscription, and then tell me how much I make, or I'd like to sell it for £1. And over time, if we can enable all the models, everybody will work out what makes them the most. But again, it's to put the flexibility and the freedom and control back to the creators.
One more question. Sorry we can't take everyone, but you have to see the other papers.
Hi, I'm Josip. I have two short questions. You sort of implied that the readers are now shifting sort of from the web-based comics, web comics, to digital comics being read on the tablets and so on. Is that actually true, or is that happening, or?
No, I think what's happening is on tablets, digital comics is growing. I think that's growing from people who were previously reading monthly print comics in terms of the US stuff. So I think we're seeing a transition partially from print to digital. What's happening to the web is I think the web comics readership is maybe shrinking slightly because people that were maybe reading web comics are watching YouTube more. So as we got the rise of the kind of, like, this is a pet theory of mine, I don't know how much is substantiated, but as we get the rise of kind of YouTube stars and the kind of YouTube channels as being a thing, I think maybe they occupy a similar cultural space that the kind of webcomics and webcomics communities did. So I think some of the biggest webcomic readerships are shrinking a bit because readers are going elsewhere to get the same kind of daily updating, regularly updating content. So,
will you somehow try to integrate also, or try to allow the already existing webcomics, for example, to be integrated in the app, or to be somehow distributed through these, or would that be possible?
It's not something we've looked at directly because of like webcomics, they say, are built around this kind of regularly updating schedule. What works really well for them is the web, and all these things have a web browser on that kind of lets you. So you're kind of duplicating something unnecessary. If someone wanted to start putting their webcomic into an Electricomic, that would be absolutely fine. And I think that's something we'd certainly explore like longer term. But it's not an immediate focus because we're more trying to make homes for complete longer form narratives, which the web doesn't serve quite as well. So if you want to tell a complete story and pop that up, the web, people will read it once, but it's not, it's harder to make an income from it. And that's where things like digital and marketplaces have a real place. Anyone that wants to put out a graphic novel all at once or a book all at once rather than do it a page at a time needs a revenue stream, and the web doesn't serve that quite as well.
There are already this digital comic marketplace kind of like Comicsy, and there's those kind of, so people do, I think they do duplicate or put their web comics out on that kind of thing. Oh, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. That was some great questions. I hope the talk was enjoyable. If we recalibrate the day slightly, we'll start the first panel at 11:35. So we'll have a little 10-minute break for tea and coffee. Do eat the Danishes; they all have to go. And anyone who's presenting next wants to come up and test their stuff, we'll start getting 10 minutes time. Great. Well done, Tom. I'm sorry to spring that microphone. Okay. Liz Douthwaite, and she's talking on when things go wrong, when things go right, meaningful interactions between webcomic creators and readers.
Which hopefully will make some kind of sense eventually. I'm sorry to have to present right after you've been told there's no more coffee. Great start. So my name is Liz. I'm a PhD student at the University of Nottingham. I'm just about going into my fourth year, and I'm going to talk about webcomics and the communities around them, which we've already had a little bit about today, so that's a good start. So I'm basically going to introduce my PhD, the studies I've done, why webcomics communities are particularly interested to me, and then a bit about, so when things go wrong, how the community can help, with a bit of a sort of case study, if you like, about copyright and attribution issues, and then when things go right, which is my main sort of part of my thesis, which will be crowdfunding and the success of crowdfunding in webcomics. Then I'm going to do a very brief bit of altruism and reciprocity and conclude, and hopefully none of you will fall asleep. So my PhD, as I said, is crowdfunding in the creative industries, looking at the roles of altruism and reciprocity. I'm originally a psychologist, so maybe that kind of makes more sense now. I have a psychology undergrad, and I've been working in multidisciplinary departments since then. Daniel already gave you a superb introduction to sort of webcomics. All I would add to that is, for my definition, they are free. They are all free. Some webcomics sort of work on subscription models, but it generally doesn't work unless it's porn. They're independent, so they're sort of single creators or sort of a group of small creators, and obviously comics on the internet, which is the main sort of definition. So I've run 5 studies now. Sorry, this slide is really boring, so I added some sound effects. First I started with an online questionnaire about website social media use, see how creators and readers interacted online. There was 209 responses, and I got 92 creators input on that, which was quite nice. Then I did some interviews with some creators, including Daniel, actually, talking about their internet use and their social media use and how they thought about their readers. I did a mini questionnaire at a Comic-Con about people who back crowdfunding, because from my sort of studies it came out that was kind of the more interesting emerging model of funding for these people. Then I did a comparison of all the projects I could find that were webcomics related, and then I did my reciprocity study. So I'm going to kind of pick and choose from each of them some quotes and some examples of kind of how I see the communities and how they can help. I became really interested in this because there are an increasing number of full-time creators. They make their living putting free stuff on the internet. It sounds kind of paradoxical, but as Brad Geiger said, they work on this business model that is to offer free to the consumer, ad-subsidized content, which then trades on audience loyalty by selling books, t-shirts, merchandise, and original art. So you build this community, they love you, they will give you money. You can also host ads, sell stuff, and crowdfunding. And again, I focused in on the audience loyalty. Again, Brad says, one of the greatest things about webcomics is the immediacy, frequency, and intensity of your interactions with readers. You can talk to them and they can talk back. So it's not like sort of your traditional comic book where you can write a fan page and you can write an email to the creator, or even if you can tell them who to go through. You can talk to them on Twitter, Facebook, you can add comments. So it really came through to me the importance of the person behind the product in this industry. And I think that works across a lot of the creative industries nowadays. People who work on the internet, people like to know there's a person there. And creators are able to foster relationships with their readers and then come to rely on them through both good times and bad times, as hopefully we will see. And just from my first set of interviews, to kind of prove my point, I've got to pick some quotes. So people like to know there's a person behind a webcomic, so they feel involved. But social media is used to help the readers to actually get to know the creator rather than just the comic. And this is actually where I got my title from. I think social media has done an amazing job of creating a community for us to support each other when things go wrong, but also when things go right. So I will start by talking about when things go wrong. From my questionnaire, I found that just from these 200 people, they were using 59 different websites to read comics, post comics, interact with each other, get out there. And it's an incredibly difficult task for the creator to kind of amalgamate all that, work out what works best for them, how to kind of get the audience that they can kind of foster these interactions and kind of make money from, essentially. I put up there some of the top ones. So you can see actually a lot of people use the webcomic hosting sites, the free hosting sites, but most of them are kind of social media. And it became very clear to me that there are issues inherent with working online, and the main ones were problems with copyright ownership, attribution, theft of work, and issues of privacy and trust. So I'm just going to sort of focus on the copyright attribution bits. If you're interested in the various strategies that people do adopt as a comic artist, I did publish a paper last year, so you should be able to find that somewhere. So an example of when things go wrong, really, really, really wrong. This is a comic by Rachel Dukes. You may have seen it. It's been shared quite a lot of times. At the time that she wrote this blog about it, it got nearly 700,000 views. But only 82,595 of them were her original version. And you can see that in order to in order to not know who the artist is, you have to actually cut off the attribution. Someone maliciously took this and cropped off the attribution and started showing it around, and that got the majority of the shares. And she actually calls it heartbreaking. I mean, it's her work, and she's seeing no benefit out of it. And a lot of these sites where it's shared are monetized sites, subscription sites. And she just kind of, it really hit. And I've read this a lot from other people. Matthew Inman of the Oatmeal had a legal battle with Funny Junk for taking his work. That's hilarious. If anyone wants to look it up, the emails are amazing. Chris Straub has blogged about it. Loads of people have blogged. Grumpy Cat stole something from Kate Beaton, and obviously Grumpy Cat makes millions. So it's kind of everywhere. And my creators that I interviewed also saw that there was a real issue, and they do talk about it within their communities. And especially this guy felt that it was just bigger names and he was safe, but then I'm sure as soon as it starts happening to him and people that he knows, he was sure that it would become a lot more close in his mind. And I kind of like this quote from a lady who's full-time webcomic creator, and she said, "Once it's on the internet, it belongs to everyone." And I think young people feel very empowered by saying that, but they don't really understand the intricacies of that or what it means to make a living from creative work. So there was this feeling that people will stick it on Tumblr, they'll just share it around. They don't really realise that someone spent their sort of passion and their sweat and their tears and stuff to create this thing. They just think it's on the internet, it's fair game. So community to the rescue. When I'm talking about the community, I mean other creators as well as the readers. And they can spread awareness about these things. So Funny Junk was boycotted. People go like Tumblr and they'll go, you've got to post the original attribution. This is who this is by. Never IFL Science, I won't swear, is guilty of this kind of posting other people's comics. And quite often you see this is such and such work. You should put it on the thing. They'll actually actively boycott people and offer advice and support, particularly from the other artists. And they trade information, flag up incidents, so that people know what websites to avoid and what sort of areas to avoid. And one of them said that it was starting to come out on Tumblr, which was considered one of the worst places for these kind of... Theft is quite a strong word because it's not always malicious, but so a lot of people do care and they'll chase people up. And this, I've got another paper in review at the moment talking about the ways creators can fight back against copyright violation. And I thought this quote was really good because the only thing you've got on your side is the community, not the law, not real technological breakthroughs. Nothing really works to help you. Readers, other artists, the whole community get furious, and that's the strength of being an artist on the internet, really, with a good following. So that was briefly when things go wrong and all the horrible stuff, but it's not all bad. Obviously, the community of fans, you get this sort of inner core of avid readers, people who really, really care about your work, so they will provide feedback, commentary, share content, and again, correctly attributed, and be like, guys, go and read this comic, it's amazing. They will buy stuff from you, it's awesome. And even if they can't back a crowdfunding campaign, quite often they'll share it with others and say, I think you guys would like this, I can't afford to give stuff, but other people might be able to. And all of this helps to increase the success of the comic manyfold. So I'll just do a brief intro to crowdfunding. I'm sure most people know what it is by now. Small amounts of people from lots of money online. Small amounts of money from lots of people online even. There are hundreds of platforms now. They do charity work, they do this creative technology, all sorts of things. From my work, there are just two big players in webcomics. There's Kickstarter, who run finite campaigns, and you make a product at the end. So normally it's a book, sometimes it's a game, things like that for my creators. And Patreon, which is relatively new, is a recurring payment system. So it's like a subscription model. There's no end goal. They just keep going, making money. Some of my webcomic creators on there are making upwards of $10,000 a month doing this now. And there's not even necessarily any promise that there's going to be a product or anything. It's just that the fans really appreciate and want to give back. So my study looked at a whole bunch of webcomics projects. I found as many as I could in the period that I was studying it, and I found some quite interesting things. Well, I think they're interesting because I'm a psychologist and I like stats and stuff. Kickstarter tends to get a lot more backers on a project, so Patreon's a much smaller kind of crowd, and a lot more money per project. I mean, a lot more money. Kickstarter comics projects seem to do really, really well. The interesting thing about amount per person, so that's sort of on the subscription model, on average, people give $4.74, it tends to be per month or per item. On Kickstarter, they give $47. So that's like 10 times more. And if you think about how often do you run a crowdfunding campaign, say a volume of a book once a year, so it's $4.74 every month or $47 a year is kind of quite comparable, which I found interesting. Kickstarter offer a lot more rewards, which is perhaps not that surprising as it is all about the goal. My main interest here as well is the pledge hiding. So this is where people don't tell you how much they've given. So it'll say this person has 50 backers, but then when you go down and it says these many people pledged a $5 and so on, it won't add up. And there's a lot more pledge hiding on Patreon. And so my theory was that it's more about altruism, it's more about this kind of fan thing. I just want to give back. I don't care if people know that I'm doing this. I don't care if I don't really, I'm not just doing it to buy a book. I really care about this. And as it is, Patreon doesn't really have a success rate. Kickstarter is massive for webcomics, 79.2%, and I'll just compare it to some of the overall stats for Kickstarter. Is huge. The success rate is very, very low on Kickstarter as a rule. Webcomics is massive. Most Kickstarter projects do seem to get more people give more, but there are a lot of tech projects, so if you want to buy a computer, you want to buy stuff, they tend to cost more, so you would give more. They get less per project, though, overall, and there are fewer backers. So I also had a quick look at the comics subcategory. They get quite a lot less per project, but they also have a higher success rate than the baseline. So comics are doing really quite well on crowdfunding. In fact, the comics category has the 4th highest success rate and also the 4th lowest number of projects. So it's a bit of swings and roundabouts. If there were more projects, would the success rate come down? We don't really know yet. Get crowdfunding and find out. So I was looking at the back and motivations, what made these communities come together and give all this money to creators. And I found 4 major areas. So individual fandom, I just really like the work. Rewards, I want a book. Finances, that's as much as I can afford to give. And community involvement, which these quotes that I'm sort of going to quite scroll through quite quickly show, it's about support and rewarding creators that they really care about. So support the independent webcomic community. It doesn't matter if I've already read it online for free. I want to support the artist. Reward creators. And I'd hate to see the ones I like disappear due to no support. They're kind of keeping the community alive, keeping the webcomics thing alive. And I prefer to support creators who interact and are involved with the community. So it's give and take. And support again. And I just love this quote. Comics are a fantastic medium doing amazing things, and I like to do everything I can to support it, and I think probably we all feel like that, whether it's paper comics, digital comics, web comics, interactive comics, game comics. Just do it. So I'm just going to end with a bit of psychology. My theory is it's about reciprocity, which is exchanging things with others for mutual benefit, so helping because you expect to get something back. But I think that it's not just physical, material goods that they want to get back. It's about social capital, it's about individual and community benefits. It's kind of about a bit of both. So I'm hoping through my latest study to be able to kind of put on a scale different types of backers, different types of people in the community, and sort of say the most successful communities are the ones with these kind of people, and this is how you can maybe foster this kind of community. So quick summary. Readers and creators form very tight-knit communities. Problems associated with sharing free content on the internet are policed and punished. Feedback and sharing allows creators to gauge their audience, improve their work, and increase their success rates. It allows them to monetize. And as I said, the community acts through reciprocity, which is not always physical. It's about social capital, warm glow, sort of feeling good about yourself, feeling good about the people that you interact with. Yay! So that's kind of a potted history of my PhD so far. Any questions? Or are we going to do that later? Okay, no questions. Yay! Come on.
Okay. Something I forgot to say to all the panelists, and I don't know if James has been doing it, but he hasn't. Is he going to start?
He will do, but he forgot this.
For anyone who's presenting, you'll get a little sign at the back. James will be holding up to let you know when you're near 5 minutes to the end, and so that you can go. It's how everyone keeps it.
You got lucky.
How long was it?
About on spot. Really.
Yay!
So next up we have. I'm going to mangle your name, aren't I?
No problem.
Vitor Blota? Did I get that
yes,
close?
That's right.
There we
Thank
go.
you.
He's come all the way from Brazil today for this, which I'm incredibly impressed by. And yours is a co-authored paper, but Bruno, your co-author couldn't be here today. And you're talking on breaking the frame, new narratives and formats for graphic novels, journalism, and human rights through digital comics in Brazil.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. In the name of the organization, thank you very much for this opportunity to present the paper. A little bit on the background of my research, and then I can locate myself here and also justify some of the possible mistakes or problems that my presentation can bring to the debate on digital comics. I come from the law field. I am professor at the Communication and Art School of the University of São Paulo. And I teach legal and ethics, legislation ethics to the journalism school. So this research on comics and human rights in comics is part of my greater project that I work on, which discusses impacts of human rights discourses in the media and in the legitimation of these rights and these discourses. So one of the cases were human rights in comics, and Bruno Conrado, which I thank very much for helping me, also took on this project to analyze 4 comic books, and 2 of them were digitalized, and these 2 were independent comics, and the 2 others that are not here in this presentation were from the state. So we're analyzing how the state and independent discourses use the ideas of the medium of comics and how this impacts the languages and discourse of journalism and of human rights education. So this presentation here is an extension of this project, focusing more on these digitalized comics and trying to discuss the implications, and also how these new digitalized comics question and problematize the medium of comics itself, and also the languages of journalism and human rights. So we begin by acknowledging the rise of digital comics and productions in comics, through comics discussing human rights, especially in journalism. Journalism has been benefiting from the medium of comics, and we know this from Joe Sacco and specifically, and they have our hypothesis is that the medium of comics can help journalism to go beyond this liberal, or this dichotomy between liberal and this in the negative sense of not impeding access to information, and this more Republican concept of access to information, which would demand from social or state actors a more positive action to provide information to help communicate the law or other information in better ways, in more accessible ways. So our hypothesis is that it goes beyond this dichotomy between not restricting access and giving access, to go in more intricate elements of human rights problems, or any type of information or theme that journalism or discourses in journalism can use, especially because they can, the comics medium can enter more peculiarities of histories, of biographical narratives, and can go beyond these blocks of information, which would be a more traditional way of providing a culture or giving access to different cultures. In terms of human rights education, we have also understood that human rights education with comic books also help human rights to go beyond this idea of knowledge transfer, and also connects people with experiences with the other, with otherness, or with other narratives that can create more identifications than when we are experiencing a more formal presentation of, let's say, experience of war or an experience of human rights violations. So the idea is that connecting with the narratives that comic books are so prone in doing, we can go beyond these more traditional ways of just transferring information and educating by this type of transfer. So in the first part, I'm just going to pass by these ideas that in our study we try to recover a little bit of the history of comics in Europe, and especially with Alan Moore's text that was published, I forgot the name yet now, but it was published in the Occupy Comics. I don't know if you've heard about this, but he wrote a very interesting long story or history of comics and as a counterculture within Europe, and he showed very interesting elements, especially this idea that comic books have this counterculture, or this transgression potential, this subversive potential that comes from satire or critique, and so it criticizes this this possible order of things or the authority. So, and also it shows a lot of class struggle, and especially, as I understood, as he was seen as one of the most important elements or characteristics of comics is the diversity of formats, especially nowadays more recent comics, is the diversity of possible uses, and this also allows for
comic books and the language itself to transcend the comics medium and become a type of discourse itself. And I think digital comics are showing a little bit of this. So in the end, I'll talk a little bit about this. And in Brazil, we have also these important elements and these key words, which are mass culture and the idea of incorporating comics in Brazil within the cultural industry paradigm. And this has been criticized more recently. But also Valdomiro Vergueira, which is a professor at the University of São Paulo, who started some decades ago to discuss the entrance of comics as a type of knowledge in the academic field. He has struggled with this many decades, and now his courses are filled with thousands of students, and now he's getting a little bit of this return. But he has identified this very interesting ambivalence in the incorporation of comics in Brazilian culture, which is this ambivalence of trying to understand what is our national identity. And this term, cultural anthropophagy, I also tried to retrieve this from a modernist movement in the 1920s that occurred in Brazil. And this was a term coined by a writer called Oswaldo de Andrade, and he talked about a cultural anthropophagy as a type of identity of the Brazilian culture. We tend to eat or digest our influences and the cultures that come to us, and we transform it. But I think this is not only a Brazilian characteristic, but it's a very interesting way of dealing with different cultures and mixing and transforming into something new. So we used a lot of conceptual analysis, and this comes also from the types of discourse analysis that I normally do in my research. And I use a lot of Jürgen Habermas's theory, and also Axel Honneth, which is his successor in the critical theory tradition. And we talk about, and then we try to analyze in which way comics can bring out new elements. So comics can be seen as a form of communicating law, communicating human rights, and also a form of promoting or engendering social recognition. So in this sense of opening spaces for the understanding of different subjectivities, which we can recognize as legitimate, as potential, as original and authentic subjectivities. So differently from watching a movie on the war in Iraq, a blockbuster from Hollywood, for example, we can try and see the more intricate relations, and also the elements that connect us. For example, the difficulty that we have to become part or not of a community, of accustomed habits from our families or from our national identity. So a very interesting, a very strong element that came from the reading of Alan Moore's text is the element of comics as a form of political and aesthetical transgression. Always has a subversive element, so we use this as index to analyze these comics and try to see if they are comics which are made in order to pass on the political ideal, or in the sense a more ideological use of comics, or in which sense the comics medium would be authentic and autonomous itself in a way it could really problematize the social order. And also, as Valdomiro Vergueiro, in the sense that Theodor Adorno works it, comics also can be a way of promoting learning experiences through the context with otherness, with a new identity, with a different identity, which we can connect because of sometimes universal questions. For example, this idea of how do we fit in our culture. And in terms of webcomics, Brazilian researchers have started to analyze this, and so comics is a new field for me in terms of academic research, and digital comics is even newer. So bear with me with these first ideas with this, but I think Edgar Franco, which is a writer, professor at the University of Goiás in Brazil, he talks about 3 generations of webcomics. I think this relates to Daniel's talk in the morning. This idea that from during the 90s until around 2001, we had this first attempts to bring digital comics to the web, but because of the problems with technology and the potential of technology, we couldn't make this transition. But after that, he talks about the second phase, which would be the mastering of the Flash program, which would bring a new phase, a new moment in this webcomics history. And the third generation would be the more recent possibilities of mixing these elements. So animation, dynamic framing, soundtrack, sound effects, infinite screen or infinite canvas, as MacLeod says, tridimensionality, multilinear narratives, and interactivity between readers and creators. So we made this big analytical table. I'm sorry about that, but it's just to show really how we try to make more concrete questions from these abstract concepts. So we came from theoretical presuppositions to criteria for analyzing empirically these 2 comics that I'm going to talk about. So, for example, in Habermas, if we have predominance of the iconic communication in the public sphere, we have to ask ourselves, do the informative and justificatory elements supersede the narratives and artistic elements of the works? So is the educational purpose superseding the artistic purpose? And what kind of impacts does this make? So we try to use, also with Alan Moore's reflections and Valdomiro Vergueiro's, to try to bring many questions for us to analyze these comics. So especially how they relate these questions, and especially the discourses, the medium of comics and art, the idea of educating and promoting a justification or ethical ideas, and also how to bring information to the fore, how to make it more contextualized. So the 2 digital works analyzed, one was Pátria Armada Brasil, which means the armed nation Brazil, but this is a quirk used with because we say Pátria Amada, which would be the loved country, Brazil. Pátria Armada, which would be the armed party. So this is a comic book. It was actually published in a newspaper, in a print newspaper, but then it went to digital format. So it's not actually a digital comics as I am understanding our discussions, but I think it's an important comic that can show us a little bit that we also have multilinear narratives. So there are many narratives in many cases where we can go, where the author can bring us inside some specific cases. So if I can show a little bit more, this also has a infinite canvas right here. So it talks about the more specific moments that were occurring. It used a lot of legal and historical documents and interviews and tried to show that. And also talked about how indigenous people were victims of the dictatorship as well. So I think this has a very strong historical element, but it doesn't elude the narrative. The narratives brings the information, and also the ethical impact. So it's very strongly connected to the medium of comics. And Meninas em Jogo, which would be this comic book that's made for the internet in this agência pública, which is this collective groups of journalists that help them produce more news connected to human rights and not only connected to the market. And it's very interesting too. Meninas em Jogo talks about prostitution in 5 minutes. Talks about prostitution of young females in the northeast of Brazil. And it's very interesting in terms of journalism, because it shows the moment when the journalist thinks about doing this reporting and realizing that it's going to be very difficult, including to explain this to the general public. So it shows her contacting an illustrator, and they go together to this region of northeastern Brazil, and they talk to some of the girls. They try to see how the human trafficking system is working there, and it's very interesting. It also got prizes. These two comic books got awards. The first one, the journalism award, the arts category for the Vladimir Herzog Prize, which is a very well-known prize in Brazil for journalism and human rights. And Meninas em Jogo also won the 7th championship on the Tim Lopes Journalism Investigative Journalism. It's on behalf of Tim Lopes, who was murdered during reportings. So if I can show just a little bit of Meninas em Jogo. You see, sometimes they mix. So the human trafficking, they explain a little bit what's going on, what are the rules, and what happens. So meanwhile, the idea of Meninas em Jogo is girls in jeopardy. But also at the same time that they were doing the reporting, we had the Confederations Cup in Brazil. So it was the idea of the girls are in the game, but they are in jeopardy at the same time. And we had protests in Brazil, and it's very interesting dislocation of themes. So that they show here the journalists seeing that very young, very young females are being, women are being abducted, and sometimes they show these more informative information really on, and also helps some of these girls to protect themselves. So this is a very interesting piece that I can give it to you if you want later on. So just to finish, we found out that these two comics have pedagogical and narrative discourses. They predominate, and they have historical precision. They have also transgression. They are subversive in the sense of criticizing the political context and also problematizing some of the artistic and normal ways of doing comics, more in the sense of getting together also informative news on human rights, and also with this artistic characteristics, has this educational potential because it has a focus on the narratives, and also, but not in this case specifically the playful elements, but this was in the other comics. It brings resources from the everyday life, and also shows this autonomy of comics. So if I can conclude, I think the basic characteristics in these two comics of comics itself were not dismissed, and I think this is the power of the discourse of comics. The autonomy of comics is what helps journalism and human rights break away from these traditional forms of communicating. We felt a little bit the need for reception studies to try to really complement our analysis. That's what we are planning to do next. there's a strong question that I still can't answer, but I feel that there's a political or moral pressure for digital comics to use social, historical, and political issues. And what kind of impacts does this pressure have? And I think the recent digital comics show that this autonomy of the medium, of the strength and how solid the idea of medium of comics is maintained, it seems that it's becoming a dimension of public discourse in general. So we can maybe talk about this comic dimension, the comic dimension or the comic book dimension of law, for example, or in which sense law or journalism, informative investigative journalism, can have this dimension, this aura of comics, and how this can help it go beyond these traditional and this more informative constraints. So this is wraps up a little bit our talk. We have some references here on the works, and I'll be glad also to discuss with you. Thank you very much for this opportunity. It's been very interesting from the start. Thank you.
Okay, so now we have our other very far-travelled guest, all the way from New Zealand. Zach, again, I'm going to struggle to get your last name right. Is it Waparia?
Waipara.
Waipara, there we go.
Yeah.
And you're talking about Batia transmission and transmedia.
I'm going to start off with a traditional way of introducing oneself. Ko hukirangi, ko manawaru ngā manga, ko waiapu, ko te ara ngā awa, ko takitumu, ko harosa ngā waka, ko ngāti porau, ko runga whakaasa ngā iwi, ko waipara, te whānau, ko Zach tōku unga. Kia ora koutou, my name is Zach, and as Daniel said, I come all the way from New Zealand to present this project, Autea Transmission and Transmedia. Because of the very sort of local context, I'll try and provide some background to the project. For those who don't know Māori, of which I have Māori ancestry, are the indigenous people of Aotearoa, or New Zealand. Some time ago, the colonisation of New Zealand by the British Empire impacted negatively on Māori to such an extent that the people and culture are still recovering some 200 years later, and that's just a statement of fact. The segment I began with is called a pepeha, and it's a statement of Māori tribal identity, which is a traditional way of introducing oneself based upon ancestral connection to forebears and geography. The only reason I can speak any of their language at all is because I learned it as an adult. Māori identify most strongly with their area and their tribe. I guess the closest analogy might be like the Scottish clan system. So my grandparents were forbidden to speak their language as children, and then so there was a natural break in the cultural transmission, so therefore my parents didn't have it. And that meant that whole generations grew up without the language. So despite a resurgence in Māori culture generally, the language itself is still at risk of becoming extinct. Around the world, one language dies every 14 days. When I talked about this with my colleagues, they were surprised to realise that there were that many languages in the world. As with all languages, Māori provides a unique viewpoint onto the world, so bound up with it are sort of esoteric areas of knowledge that are also at risk of disappearing. In New Zealand, a predominantly monolingual country, so even though we have many different ethnic groups and there are lots of different languages being spoken, generally mainstream culture is monolingual. It's generally just has English as the main language. Māori language and culture has sometimes been negatively portrayed and politicised for this reason. Research has suggested that if the language is to survive, it must reach as broad an audience as possible, and that children are the best chance for the language's survival. Autea was completed as a master's thesis in art and design in 2014, so it has a practical component and a written component. The written component is often referred to as an exegesis, and then there's like a practical component that goes with it as well. And it was a transmedia storytelling project that aims to transmit cultural knowledge via a motion comic, an e-comic, and an interactive game. Because the intended audience are primary school aged children, so in New Zealand that would be 5 to 10 years, both Māori and non-Māori, the story is told in English for the most part, with Māori words and phrases explained and translated. Might be useful to just explain a little bit about what the story is. So it's set on this this island, which I've come up with this name based on an old legend that I came across, only one that I could find, called Otia. And the story follows Kurutai, who's this young kind of character here, a nature sprite of mysterious origin in Moko Tawhito, an ancient tuatara, as they attempt to retrieve the fragmented life force of the island before calamity occurs. So the tuatara, for those who don't know, is a reptile that lived around the same time as the dinosaurs. Otia also incorporates many supernatural beings, or patapaerehe, and animals that are not well known in mainstream New Zealand culture. These are beings with amazing abilities, magical histories, as powerful and appealing as modern superheroes. So this is why I thought it might be quite a good place to start. I thought I should just talk about what it is not. It's not actually about creating a resource, language resource in the sense of teaching someone to speak a language, because there already obviously exist many kinds of avenues to acquire actual language learning, and it cannot be duplicated inside a small story that's designed primarily for entertainment. It is also not a retelling of existing mythology, because most often within Māori culture they tend to be retellings of existing stories, often quite famous ones. On the other hand, it is actually about trying to foster the conditions for someone who simply wants to know more, so creating a kind of a safe way to kind of engage with the culture. Yet the story is original in its creation while retaining links to the kinds of mythic stories that have come beforehand. And it grew from a desire to communicate my overall positive experience and empowerment gained by learning Te Reo Māori, the Māori language, which, as I said before, I kind of picked that up as an adult. I saw a chance here to create a resource that naturally intersects with my background in illustration and teaching experience across digital media, crafting an adventure story in which the language, customs, and legends are interwoven throughout, presenting it as entertainment to partly divorce it from the hostile dogma that I alluded to before, but also just to make it appealing. After all, if it works for Elvish, Klingon, and Dothraki, and they're not even real languages. And I say that despite them, the artificial constructed nature of these languages, fans of the stories are motivated to learn them. So they operate like real languages, and the fact that the real linguists have sat down to construct them and build them and give them grammar, but they're not actually born out of a real culture. But I mean, there are positive upsides to this. If somebody can get really enthused enough to want to learn one of these languages, maybe it could work for a language that's born out of a real cultural worldview. That's where I kind of saw some real possibilities. I'll quickly talk about the scope. Like obviously in the ideal situation, it would have been great to carry out like user testing of the finished media, but given the amount of work required inside the time frame of one academic year, which is all I had to kind of make and build and kind of research everything, and the lack of a team of developers, user testing really sat outside the scope of this project. Therefore, the project is propositional in nature, so it's based on anecdotal observations from earlier sort of iterative design experiments, professional experience such as like being in the classroom and actually assisting students with projects, and adapts three core values developed by some educational game designers who are building games specifically for children, and some transmedia scholars. And these three core values were education, entertainment, and empowerment. And I thought it might be useful to provide a quick summary of these principles. So education, which is framed as learning via transmedia play, had three kind of key ideas. The first one was that it can promote new approaches to reading. So all three media in my project use some form of written text, such as subtitles or speech balloons or instructions. The comic styling of all three media can engage children visually by allowing access to story via the pictures. Children take cues from pictures to assist in understanding text, and in a transmedia context you can enhance this by the use of things like sensory cues such as audio and motion. One of the second ideas was that transmedia learning via transmedia play can encourage learning via these multiple entry points. The audience will absorb the story pieces in any order they decide. So as a creator, you might decide that there is a specific order that would work the best, that's how I kind of imagined it, but actually you can't control that. If you give it over to an audience, they're going to go to the piece that I guess they're the most interested in, which might be maybe there is someone who prefers to watch like a little motion comic, or maybe there's someone who they prefer to actually do something, get on the game and start playing. The audience will absorb the story pieces in any order to decide. Young imaginations are captured by story when reinforced across media such as comics, cartoons, and video games. And the last idea is that it involves exploration, experimentation, and remix. So the diverse use of media actually encourages exploration, because you encounter the same characters and the same story elements, they just happen to be across different media. The full story is only gained by accessing all three of these forms, while story engagement encourages children to take stories and characters away, retell and remix them. And in this example, my daughter said about replicating the same scene from a comic in her own fashion, and this is all unprompted. This is just, she has happened to see me working on a page, and she was like, oh, what's happening here? And then she just grabbed a pen and a bit of paper and away she went. So it brings us to the second core value, which is entertainment. So the project uses entertainment across these multiple platforms for the purpose of education, or in this case, cultural transmission. There being no real difference between learning and entertainment, only the intent of the creator, I guess. The story is the focus, the narrative guides everything, including any educational aspects, with cultural elements used as an accessible part of the storytelling landscape. But as I'll show later on, the Māori knowledge used can also actually affect the narrative design. And the last core value was this one, empowerment, which I found was quite interesting. So as I said earlier, I took inspiration from a group of game designers. They worked on a project called Quest Atlantis. I think it was based out of America. They had a huge team of resources and researchers to actually go in and work with social groups. And they used this ethnographic process to design games for social change, where the culture that's being examined provides solutions. And in their words, it was understanding the lives of those we wish to serve. So although my project actually began as a creative endeavour, and it's not autobiographical in any real way, the reasons for pursuing it stem from these personal cultural experiences I described earlier. Well-Beings describes heuristic-based research of this kind as graphic design statements that wholly or in part draw on navigations of the self. So for me, the personal and the cultural form an auto-ethnographic line of inquiry. Because of the cultural nature of the project, it was important to locate this inside a Māori research context, employing kaupapa Māori principles, which simply just means culturally meaningful models. Kaupapa translates as purpose or concept, and employing a kaupapa Māori approach simply means that a Māori worldview has been considered from the outset. So before even getting started on the project, it's kind of looking about, well, how would this work inside the Māori worldview? So much of the Māori language deals in metaphor and illusion that metaphorical models are often used in Māori academic research. The most applicable for my project is that of whakapapa or genealogy, which is a big thing inside Māori society. And the literal meaning of the word itself is split into two parts. The first part, whaka, is like a prefix meaning to be or to do, and papa is like flat or earth. So when you put it together, it's the laying out flat one thing upon another, as you would do the laying out of generations of ancestors when you're maybe reciting a genealogy. Whakapapa also explains the origins of the material and immaterial things that exist in the Māori world. So it's kind of a way of like stitching everything together. There are 2 lines of genealogy for this project. Those ancestral links between my new story and the pre-existing Māori mythology, and the creative genesis of the project itself, which led to those transmedia components. So why transmedia? Well, working across different media at the same time held a certain appeal for me, offering challenges that would keep the project interesting, because there would be untold number of problems arising from working across in different art forms. Henry Jenkins calls transmedia storytelling the art of world making. So we wondered, how might world building that taps into an existing mythology enhance a cultural worldview? And could a transmedia project offer solutions for my research question? Despite the recent trend for transmedia, this idea of stories across media is not a new idea, but a feature of pre-literate society. So I came across this quote, which I don't think I'll bother to read out, also from Henry Jenkins. It's the idea that actually this is something human society has been doing for a while. They have a multitude of different art forms, and actually, if a story is compelling enough, it'll find its way into being depicted in these different forms. And I thought that was kind of really interesting, because transmedia for the most recent times has been a bit of a buzzword, and yet if you take this view on it, it's kind of a really broad interpretation of it. It's kind of been around for a while. So I thought, well, how could this work inside the Māori world, or Te Ao Māori? And I thought, well, the same might also be said with that, where mythic stories have always been told across a variety of art forms. So in this example here, there's a famous demigod called Tāwhaki, and the stories, or the cycle of stories, details a set of adventures about this demigod, an ancestral hero, who climbs to the heavens to retrieve these baskets of knowledge, which are then used to disseminate knowledge to humankind. And that is depicted in carved form, and then there are sort of adjacent woven panels that use a pattern known as Te Arapotama, which is a kind of ladder. You can see it's a sort of staircase motif, and that's obviously again used to reinforce this idea of climbing. And then aspects of the tale are also preserved in proverb and in song. And although these are not created by a single person, the oral tale, the carving, the panels, the proverb, they're all part of the same story. And a skilled orator, or kai kōrero, would be able to draw all these threads together into a single thematic speech known as a whai kōrero. And they would usually conclude that speech with a song, and it would make the most sense to use the song that was also part of that story. This would be delivered in a traditional meeting house setting, and usually these objects would be able to be seen, so they could be used as visual prompts for the speaker. The speaker would be able to stand and actually just be able to deliver this off the cuff. So given this precedent, a transmedia project, I thought, could work comfortably inside a Māori context, but I realised I don't actually carve wood or weave flax or tattoo skin. So I found this quote, which I thought was quite helpful. It's like, Dr. Christy Dina says, create with media that you already work with, that you love, or you are genuinely curious about. So I chose to create my story in these 3 portions: a motion comic, an e-comic, and an interactive game, and these sat naturally inside the curricula I was teaching on. I then investigated traditional forms of Māori art as well, because I thought, well, it might be useful to look for points of connection with new media and old media. And since comics, including motion comics and game design, are really wide-ranging fields, the traditional forms of Māori art were actually useful to apply relevant lenses and kind of help focus the project and narrow its scope, so it just didn't kind of blow out inside of the one academic year. I'll quickly run through what these lenses are. So from a Māori perspective, I investigated comics, and I couldn't really find any analogous kind of art form, but so the comics medium is a wholly new non-indigenous art form. Nevertheless, it is one that holds great personal attraction. The power of the comics medium lies in its ability to balance words and pictures in creative juxtaposition, where each element provides one half of the overall narrative. However, from the point at which spoken Māori, because it was an oral language, was transcribed by missionaries into a written system, Māori artists began adding text to supplement the visual work. So whether it was carved, woven, painted, or inked, Comic storytelling I see as a natural outgrowth of this practice. The function of Māori art has always been to connect the ordinary world with the spiritual one, including gods, supernatural beings, and ancestors. So my project also seeks to reaffirm this principle by employing the modern idiom of comics, and it also employs aspects of Māori and Western design. Māori games and pastimes originate from certain deities and are connected to spiritual beliefs as well. Overall, though, it is important to understand that all aspects of Māori culture are interwoven, making strict divisions between games, sports, pastime, stories, and other art forms are kind of arbitrary. I'll quickly move on to the kinds of knowledge that I was trying to embed inside the story. Specifically, some Māori astronomy, including Matariki, which is the new year. It occurs in the midwinter in New Zealand, and it's connected with the rising of the Pleiades. The concept of Māori, or life force, and some Māori language in the form of proverbs and phrases. But the broader Māori worldview employed has also influenced the project, so more subtle forms are included. Quickly race through some of these. Tikanga simply translates as protocols or guiding principles for living, but they also exist in mythology as rules regarding supernature. Used as creative parameters, they assisted with the story, guiding the internal logic of the characters' actions and solving plot problems. These are just a couple of short examples. For lizards in particular, green geckos were thought to be omens of evil, and that malignant spirits could enter their bodies. This became a useful story idea when a hapless gecko is possessed by a ghostly spirit. Moko kata, the green gecko, is named directly from this belief, because moko means lizard and kata or katakata meaning laughter. Names are always important, so Moko Tawhito, who was the tuatara, Tawhito means ancient, but is never used with people. The name Kurutai has four meanings, one of which is salty or brackish water, and it's related to the salty sea spray. In another example, Māori people tend to identify themselves using location before personal names. So for Māori, geography is a huge part of identity. Maunga, the word for mountain, means to be held or fixed, and is used to locate one's tribal area, and the mountain is always listed first in the pepper heart. No hea koe means where are you from, and generally this would come before you actually ask somebody's name, for Waito Ingoa. Based on this concept, the animals greet each other in a similar fashion. So the albatross gives greetings from the wind, while the tuatara responds with greetings from the earth. Some concluding thoughts. Otia aims to encourage positive associations with Māori language, culture and mythology in a way that reflects and develops the identity for all New Zealand children, so it's inclusive in this instance. Rapua te mea ngaro is a proverb, a famous proverb. It's used inside the story world as an exhortation to pursue that which is lost or hidden, so it's like part of the quest that the characters have to go on. But it's also a metatextual reference to the purpose of the project, which is to reveal aspects of traditional knowledge which have fallen out of use. In this sense, Aotea is a propositional model, transmedia resource that aims to transmit these cultural concepts via the repetition of visual, linguistic and conceptual elements across media. Just as the main character in my story, Kurutai draws on his dual heritage, half god and lizard, the finished project is a gestalt of Te Ao Māori and transmedia, a working synthesis of these two sides, taha Māori and taha Pākehā, a reflection of my own heritage in the modern world of Aotearoa. And if there's one main thing to really take away from this, given that transmedia has most often been used, it seems, a lot of the time to sell plastic toys, rather than just being a tool for branding, it can be used for something more empowering, such as a resource to assist with cultural preservation. Is therefore an appropriate methodology for others hoping to do the same. And thanks.
Okay, so if anyone has questions for any of the panelists, what's happened to the microphone?
My microphone.
I'll stand for direct questions.
I don't really know who it's a question for, but it was just the last panel talking about the idea of language. with kind of transmedia and the fact that you can kind of make changes and whatnot, I don't know if it's something that's out there, but has anybody thought about doing a comic that is universal in language, where you could select an English language or a French language? Or I was just wondering, does anybody know if that's something that exists already?
Oh, okay, right.
Anyone else? Questions? Cheers. I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name and I've lost the sheet here. Victor, thank you. A question for you. You're talking about comics connecting, saying that with compared with written journalism, the comic was able to bring in the emotional connection and so on, which is obviously a very powerful positive thing. Do you see it having a negative side as well, potentially? I mean, the image that sort of springs up is, for example, the way the Third Reich used visual imagery to sort of, against the Jewish people.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Don't worry, you can.
This one? I can.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for this question. I think this is an important element that I should consider more in discussing these potentials for connections and affections. But the problem and the risk of aestheticization of politics is always present, and I think important or maybe an interesting way to analyze this would be to bring out some different comics, and there are some made in Brazil by, for example, police officers that are known for being killers of people, and one of them he's now a member of Congress, and he's made a comic book in order to justify his actions. And I think the way and explain, and he writes it. I want to make it clearer how we face the dangers of everyday life and the burglars and the attackers, and how we should be fearful, etc. And I think maybe a way to distinguish between a comic that can bring this positive affection from one that can take us to this aestheticization of politics would be to understand in which sense these more ideological elements are superseding, are being stronger than the narrative aspect and the artistic aspect. And so I think even this idea of the autonomy of comics could help us to understand this problem. Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Other questions? Yeah.
Liz spoke quite a bit about the community around supporting of artists. And quite often those communities seem to attempt to be removed from sort of political discourse. But the two other speakers brought up very, very political topics. How do those communities change if a comic book is political? And if there's attacks and challenges to the subject, does it happen in a different way if they're challenging a creative medium like comic books?
I purposely stayed away from delving into what the genres were and what the actual comics were trying to do and say, to try and kind of get a cohesive view of kind of see if the community is kind of the same, that kind of transcends the genres. But some of what I didn't talk about was kind of feedback and support and stuff. It is great, but if it's a controversial topic, then don't read the comments. It becomes like an argument in the comments, and it all gets very heated, and people get attacked on Twitter, and so it kind of works very supportive, but also very kind of, it can blow up, as anything on the internet can, an innocent comment. But for particular political comics, I haven't really kind of delved into the differences in the communities for my work.
Question there.
Hi, I just have a quick question for Zach, actually, about the transmedia project. And you sort of talk about motion comic, e-comic, and so on. what were the challenges? I think you mentioned the challenges of how your audience actually consumes that. Did you make each component self-contained then, or how are you working around that?
So the motion comic I saw was like a kind of prologue. So the original, that's how I saw the original order. And then the e-comic itself was like the kind of main body. It was like the first act, if you like, and then that would naturally truncate at a point which would launch you into like having to kind of explore the world via the interactive game. That seemed to make the most sense in terms of like trying to split the three components up. But as I said before, once you hand that over, it's up to the audience themselves to decide what they want to do with it in terms of the challenges. The unexpected challenges I found is it's quite hard shifting gears when you're working between three different things, and sometimes you're creating assets that you might want to use across all three media, and so something in another project can't move forward until you've built something somewhere else. So there was that kind of, the timeline was really odd. The interesting thing I found, which I hadn't expected, was that sometimes actually working on a different piece of media would give you new ideas for something else. So you'd be working on it and you'd build something and go, well, actually I hadn't planned to do that. It would start to influence maybe how you would tell the story somewhere else, which was unexpected, but you just sort of went with it because it seemed like a good idea at the time.
Yeah, I'm wondering about, for Vitor and for Zach, I'm wondering, for both of you, what kind of follow-up you found in terms of reception, reaction, kind of tying into Liz's discussion about how a community can build around these comics. Are there communities, presumably, that are using, for example, your comic, or people reading the two Brazilian ones you covered? I wasn't quite clear, by the way, on the first one. You talked about this La Patria Amada, whether that was it talking about indigenous people, some cases from the past, or was it actually addressing topical, urgent issues now? From the past, so was it had a certain kind of so was it actually sort of saying we did this in the past, we should be doing better things now, kind of thing, or we are doing? What was it? Just basically bringing to light stuff that had been perhaps not so reported in the media from the past?
I think it was the second option. There is want to try to recover things that are hidden, and we are in this process of gaining. We just had a Truth Commission, and now there are being efforts to communicate the report of the Truth Commission, because it's a 5-volume document. So I think there are efforts that are connected. So this was published during the 50 years of the military coup that occurred last year, the 50th anniversary. So yeah, I think the main goal here was to recover real facts from the past, so with historical precision, but also
these comics as to what effect they're having, the interaction, what kind of community is perhaps built around them, whether, for example, some of the women involved in the prostitution are engaging or sharing their stories anonymously. Is there any kind of ongoing impact and research you can carry out?
We have not done research on that, but
it's not a finite work, is it?
The prizes, I think, are a good sign of. For the more specialized critique, but I think also the journalists are using more this form or this medium. So I think within the professionals, I think we're getting a good response. But I think reception studies are really important in this way. But there are many studies who talk about how this can be used for educational purposes, and so we're having conferences in Brazil about that. So, but I think deeper studies on reception could be made, and I think this can develop to deeper understandings. Also, this important question of how maybe you are using the medium in order to have political goals only, but but also I think from sorry,
Zach's presentation, the fictional element is something that I didn't mention. And I think this the two cases are not, they don't use fiction, but at the same time other fictional works, and can also, I think, bring new perspectives on.
Yeah, it's interesting how
truth. Yeah.
both the indigenous people, the Ottawa and the Maori people who are represented.
Very good that you've actually, you've involved from the outset the Maori perspective and culture. I get the impression that with the Brazilian project, is that perhaps the indigenous people weren't really much involved, or it was more kind of a sort of somewhat distant kind of, isn't it a shame that we're not actually going to talk to them and involve them and involve their culture very much in the project. Should be better. And I just want to ask, so Zach, what kind of follow-up are you looking, are you monitoring, are you hearing how people are getting on with it, how they're using it? Will you learn from that? Yeah.
Stage. Part of it's been printed, so the motion comic, elements from the motion comic and the e-comic itself have been combined and printed as a physical copy. So they've found their way into like schools and libraries back in New Zealand. And I've been in talks with school teachers who are quite keen to have some of the stuff actually tested like in the classroom. Of course, that would involve ethics. That would go through an ethics process as part of a proper research project. But it's really good that the other one's saying we would like to actually do something with this inside the classroom. Thanks.
Question over there.
Hi, my question's basically about Kickstarter. So you kind of talked about sort of like the reaction of like the communities. So my question is basically about I don't know if you've heard of like Pictures for Sad Children, the John Campbell thing. So what was like the community reaction to that? Did that make them less likely or more likely to invest in sort of like Kickstarters from like comic book creators, because obviously that went quite badly? Stuff.
So I don't know. It was all the data I collected was before it kind of all kicked off in a big way. But I followed it in various formats, and it was kind of split between people who were just very sorry for what had happened and just felt really bad for him, and was still kind of this kind of empathic feeling, and then the kind of entitled people who sort of went off on one and how dare this happen? I don't trust anyone anymore, and it seemed quite evenly split. But my feeling was the kind of the inner people who are kind of would self-identify as being part of kind of the webcomics community were generally quite more empathetic than people just coming in from the outside and going, he failed and he melted down, and just don't really get the workings of the communities.
Is it possible to access sort of like your project here, or is it just basically New Zealand?
I uploaded a short kind of trailer, which kind of I had to put together for a presentation back at university that I graduated from, and so it's just like it's got little samples of each of the three things. So if you look at Vimeo and my name, you should be able to come across it. So if anyone else is interested.
I've got a quick question for Liz as well. I was just curious, because it seems like you're focusing primarily on the English language webcomics community. I wonder if you've looked at all at other like Mexican or Korean or any of the others in any kind of comparative way, or if that's something
No,
later.
I'd love to. It was a decision I firmly made at the beginning. I don't speak those languages. It was very hard to kind of read the comments and get into the kind of mindset, and it probably is quite cultural, so I sort of stuck with the English language. And I would like to look at sort of the Japanese particularly, because they have a very rich history of comics, and they've got a lot of their kind of digital comics are quite different in the way that they present them and things like that, so I'd be quite interested in that kind of thing. And again, some of the other cultural backgrounds, but I have English language comics from these places, and they seem to come in the same kind of group of having really dedicated kind of reception and fans.
I've just got one very quick sort of I think it's very, very important that
Alan isn't here. He would be very pleased that you brought up about that, the Occupy Comics essay, because that to me is one of the things that I wrote down almost from the beginning of this conference. Is what is this? Whether it's Electricomics or whatever, what are digital comics giving us? If they're just giving us more stories, just more and more stories, but what are we doing with those stories? What do we actually just leave it wide open to people to do whatever they want, which is a very nice kind of free and easy thing, or maybe some things want to set examples. Certainly, Alan wasn't just writing that essay for fun. He was wanting to instigate a feeling that maybe the medium is absolutely ripe now for doing stuff that not just Britain but the world needs. These kind of stories need to get out there. So I guess so. I'm just saying that I'm wondering, perhaps back to you, Liz, the people that are following, that are in these webcomic communities. How many do you get any sense of them actually wanting to support this as a kind of act of I'm not buying into the corporate stuff? Is that something you've actually asked? Because that to me, that's a very important element of this, that they are not.
I've had sort of comments and sort of all my open-ended kind of stuff. There were, at one of the comic conventions I went to, just chatting to people about my work. Quite a few people did say, I don't want to buy into the big publishers. I want all the money to go to creators.
So I guess my question there is, do you think corporations will be looking at this model going?
I think they are, yes. Yes, they are, yes. They have, they're starting. They're starting, if you look at Twitter, kind of, they are starting to. Yeah, exactly.
Don't you like my comics?
I'm a real human being pleased by our comics, yes. It is definitely starting to. If you look at Twitter and things like that now, and like Facebook groups, there are people kind of going, yeah, look at me, I'm real. Like, it's quite interesting to see.
I'm afraid it's going to have to be the last question, because we've got to leave a little time for lunch and a little time to catch up on the day. Thanks to all our panelists. Let me give them So we were due to start after lunch at 1:20, and I think we start at 1:40 quite sharp. I think everyone 40 minutes to grab some lunch, not leave us too far behind. So we'll start again at 1:40.
Yeah, I know.